to the cloud. So, and that way, if people have questions, you can certainly put it in the chat. Laird, I see you had a raised hand. Did you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, I would really like to ask, it's all right with me if you record this session, but what is your purpose for recording it and how will it be used?
Great question. Great question. Usually we record things for our own internal purposes and review, but we also know that with webinars, most people or many people sign up for a webinar in the hopes that they can get the recording so they can watch it at their leisure. So for instance, if a healthcare professional had another meeting or a family member had to be giving care at the time and couldn't get away, but they wanted the recording so they could watch it later. So that's usually what it's for. We don't put it out to the media or anything like that. It's just for internal purposes and for other people who have registered to participate in the program. Good question. Good question. All right, other housekeeping information. This is a long webinar. I mean, like really long. We will take a 5-10 minute bio break. I mean, it's nice now that we all are doing this from our homes. We don't have to wait 5 minutes or 10 minutes, or for women, a half hour to get to the ladies' room, right? So we'll have a brief bio break about halfway through. I do love speaking to a live audience. So if you're comfortable and you would like to, feel free to put your cameras on. You don't have to, but I do love seeing your faces and your reactions. As I said, please make sure that you rename yourself with first name and last initial. And please also forgive my pets. I have 2 wonderful pets. One is a dog who requires more medication than most people living with dementia. She's a little high strung. She's a rescue. You get it. And she's very sweet. My daughter is in charge of keeping her quiet during the presentation. But if she breaks free and wants to come and give me kisses, I can only do so much. And I have a lovely Siamese cat who hopefully won't make an appearance, but if you see me shooing something away, it's probably her. Let's see here. If you would please, in the chat, please make a note of who you are or where you're from. I assume most of you are probably in the New York City area, but maybe not. And so please do let us know where you're from and what your relationship is to a person. If you are a person living with dementia, if you are a professional caregiver or a family care partner, please let us know in the chat just so I know. We believe that it's a good mix of people, but I want to just make sure that I'm meeting everybody's expectations and answering the questions that you may have. As I said, it's a long presentation and we'll get through a lot of content. I know what I mean in my head. So please, there are no stupid questions. If I'm not making sense, please tell me to clarify or please ask me to clarify. And Michelle will be monitoring the chat so that we can find out a little bit of making sure that we're answering your specific questions. Some of the content that I'm going to touch on today includes information about intimacy and sexuality. We'll talk a little bit about how people with dementia, where the issues arise. We also have, someone from Colorado, that's cool. We also have issues that we will talk about when it becomes problematic, some of the issues that family care partners have, some of the issues that healthcare professionals have in providing assistance to people living with dementia. We'll talk about some of the legal issues as well, because there are some really, I mean, we call this touchy issues, but not just the issues. A lot of times the biggest issue comes from legalities. And there are no easy answers on that. I'll tell you that in case you're logging on for the answer to that. There are no easy answers. We'll talk a little bit about the experience that I've had working in the field, as well as my understanding of the current interpretation of the rules and regulations in both long-term care and just in basic legal domains. Although I am not a lawyer and I am not giving legal advice, I will give you the experiences that we've had so that you can kind of ask the questions of your legal team or professionals or your social workers or your ombudsman or whomever. And then we'll kind of wrap up with just some summaries on communication and some tips to help facilitate really a quality of life for both you, the person living with dementia, for the family care partners, and for professional caregivers. So Michelle, anything else before I jump into content? Oh, yay, Connecticut. Yay, Connecticut rules. Oh, she's a PT. My husband's a PT. My husband, and we all know PT stands for pain and torture. We know that for a fact. It also stands for Pam and Tom. I'm Pam, he's Tom. So, all right, Michelle, anything else
No,
I should?
I think you covered it all. We have
All
a nice
right.
mix of individuals, professionals, individuals, carers.
Okay. Great.
Yeah, we have a really nice group here.
All right, excellent. I would expect nothing less. Okay, now let me see if I can share this and we will watch this video. Can you all see my screen? Yes, I'm getting some nods. That's good. Okay, so let's just jump in here and hopefully everything will work the way I had planned. One of the things that I always like to start with, because a lot of times when we're dealing with issues of intimacy and sexuality, we forget we're talking about human beings. You know, this isn't just dad. It's not just, you know, Jim in room 301, and it's not just a spouse. This is a person with adult human needs, emotions, feelings, expectations about life. They all have a past history, both positive and negative, and our relationship with them is something that is always evolving, regardless of our role. But because of the progression of dementia, as the individual living with dementia changes and their symptoms worsen, our roles need to adjust and adapt as well. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. And our relationship influences our issues and perspective. So if I'm an adult child, my relationship to my mom, to my dad is going to obviously influence what these issues are. And we also come in it with our own values, our own emotions, our own expectations. And all of this is true whether or not we're comfortable with this subject. So what we may see an older person, this one here, born in 1926. We see gray hair, maybe some laugh lines, some wrinkles, trendy clothes, maybe some arthritic fingers, slow gait. And she tells me she hates her old voice and she insists on makeup. How does she see herself? How would staff or health professionals see her? How would her husband, her child, her other family, how would her neighbors see her? Well, what's interesting about this particular picture is that I worked with a company to age progress a celebrity. It's a celebrity who's well known, but died young. So you may or may not recognize this person, but you know how they do age progression on, or they used to, at least when I was a kid, they used to do age progression of children who had been runaways or had been abducted, and they would age progress. We did this with adults to see what they would look like as older people. Any guesses as to who this is? You can unmute yourselves, shout it out. Anybody?
Could it be you, Pam?
It is not me. I should be so lucky. Okay, so now I'm going to be really embarrassed when I show you who it is here. We age progressed Marilyn Monroe, and we don't see her as an older woman. But imagine if Marilyn Monroe aged and got dementia, what her expectations of aging would be, what her expectations of sexuality, of intimacy, of sensuality might be. And of course, we'll never know. But all we have to do is ask our older people now, what are theirs? I'm not suggesting we do that for everybody, but we need to consider, how does an older adult see themselves? And here in this picture, this is a gentleman who was born in, I think, the 1930, was known for bodybuilding. He was a lifeguard during late high school and college, joined the Navy, ended up getting a medical discharge from the Navy because he had a duodenal ulcer, which is something that ran in his family. But he also ran for Mr. Universe, and I don't remember in my research whether or not he won. But that's in the middle, Sean Connery. And I thought Sean Connery's a good-looking man. I mean, he's got something, right? He had a look, he had a way of melting a woman with a glance, right? But I never knew that he was a bodybuilder and might look like that. I think of him as 007 and later movies. Here's a youngster, very little cute baby, and he grew up and became a bodybuilder as well. I know him as Agent Derek Morgan from Criminal Minds, and he's getting a little older now. And what do you do with the receding hairline and the grays? And I know in his current show they make him dye his gray beard a lot so that he looks more like the Hundo character in SWAT. But he's now 52, and for the first time after all of these years and Criminal Minds starting baby girls and calling all of his female fans baby girls, he now has one of his own. And I can only imagine, after all of the innuendo that goes through Instagram and I'm sure all of the other social media themes, what is his daughter going to be like if he grows old and gets dementia? And what is amazing about some of these things is that whether we have people who are named, like going back to, oh my God, I just blanked on his name. James Bond, Sean Connery. Wow. He was People Magazine's sexiest man alive in 1989. Does he now just all of a sudden become sexless? And we don't think about older adults and intimacy and aging the same way that we do younger people. We believe that our parents, and certainly their parents, only had sex the number of times that there are children in the family. So I'm the oldest of 3 girls. My parents had sex 3 times. And we also have other myths. We also think that people don't think about sex. We don't think of them as thinking that they are sexy. We don't think of that. And in fact, for men, what they did or say at age 25, that gets us to think, ooh, wow, thanks. If they say the same thing at age 75, we think they're dirty old men. They're lewd, they're lascivious, that's disgusting. And women, we think they would never initiate intimacy or sexuality. They need our protection. These are myths. Older adults don't need to think about sex and don't have sexual needs. And all older adults are straight. Another myth. Organizations, that the values of that organization and the beliefs are shared by all staff, simply by osmosis, apparently. These are the typical myths that we have in aging services and even any place outside of the couple, okay? When we have a single older person, we assume that they're single and therefore sexless. And we know that's not true either. So we're going to look at all of these myths and look at some statistics tonight and look at some of the issues that become sometimes problematic, but sometimes also just a part of everyday life. So some of the statistics: older adults are not asexual, as I said. Obviously, that's not true. We know that about, that a lot of the stereotypes and the myths are really based in those stereotypes, those expectations of popular media, that only young people and sexy people, however social media, or media, popular media defines that, engage in sex or should engage in sex. In fact, we know 65% of older adults between the age of 65 and 80 remain sexually active, responding to AARP surveys. Now, you could make an argument based in statistics that only the people who are going to report positive sexual, activity would respond to that poll. So the numbers could be skewed. And that's possible, but 65% is still not unremarkable. 2.4 million older adults right now over age 65 identify as LGBTQ population. 43% of older Americans are happy with their sex life. Only, I will say, only 43%, less than half. Rarely do long-term care agencies and communities have policies not only about how to respond to intimacy and sexuality, but about protecting the sexual rights of the residents. We'll talk about that as well. We also aren't real good at identifying the issues that become very complicated, such as what's that gray line between right to sexual expression and creating a hostile workplace or becoming abusive with care or during care. All right, let me define intimacy first. I don't want to keep track of my time here. So intimacy is really much deeper. We talk about the sharings of yourself with another, where you feel vulnerable, where you feel unique, where that's honored, and where both people or multiple people are worried about your well-being. And that can be anybody in families. This is not necessarily about sex at all. You know, I have an intimate relationship in my nuclear family, my husband, my kids, you know, and with my extended family, with my sister and her family, my other sister and her family, and my mom and dad. So, you know, we have intimacy, and that's, you know, shared jokes, shared silliness, shared sadness, shared fights. And at one point in our lives, intimacy was really all consuming. And it, you know, I see it now in my 17-year-old daughter who's got her first real boyfriend. And it's just so cute. Tomorrow night, they're going to stay here and make homemade pizzas, and that's their Valentine's. And it's just so cute to see her texting him. And last night we were trying to figure out something that happened in the football game. And it was, you know, well, Anthony says blah, blah, blah. You know, it's so sweet. And so for her right now, this is her whole life. And you can tell because the grades are starting to drop a little bit. But without explanation, we all knew what we as an individual knew what the other person was feeling. Two souls really with matching heartbeats. Intimacy can have a lot of different expectations, just the desire to be called by your name and not sweetie, honey, or dearie, to receive smiles and kindness, other kinds of affection, and where your mutual well-being is really supported based on the capacity that the person has. So I don't necessarily think of it the same way when the person has dementia, because there's a reciprocity that changes. We talk in our professional circles all the time about whether or not we should use the term caregiver, care partner. In the UK and other parts of the world, they call it carers. Michelle and I have had that conversation recently. You know, we're trying to get away from caregiver because it really defines a one-way relationship. I give, you take. I give, you receive. And what we're really trying to talk about here is that in order for the caregiver, the family member who's the healthy, well spouse or daughter or son or whatever the relationship, the healthy, well caregiver has needs too. And they need a reciprocity. They need the smiles. They need the connection. They need the reinforcement. It's like me talking on a webinar to a whole bunch of names on a black screen. There's no intimacy there. I said, I love seeing your faces. And right now I've got Laird's face watching, and it's very nice. And I've got Sylvia's ceiling. So, you know, not the same. It's just not, oh, there she is. But it's that kind of thing, right? Where we all have that need to connect. So that's why I really like the terms care partner, because it implies that there's a connection and that we're each getting something out of this relationship. So we're going to talk about, and as you know from other workshops that we do at Care and Kind, those relationships change when a person has dementia, but we still have needs on both sides. So one of the things that I wanted to share, everybody, and if you know this, you know, feel free to tune out for a second. We talk a lot about different ways to connect with someone and meet their needs for intimacy. And I really wanted to remind people about the 5 love languages. And this is where we go beyond what our physical expectations are, because there are a lot of families who will say, well, I don't feel the same. We'll talk about this in a second. I don't want to have the same relationship, or this is my father. I'm not going to help him meet his sexual needs. There are other ways of helping someone meet their personal needs other than sex, and it includes sharing physical touch. There's a research article, don't ask me where it is because I would have to really dig for it. I really don't remember. It's a good research article though, and it was, and good meaning, it was a huge number of people. It was good science behind the study that showed that people with dementia need growing needs of touch, or have growing needs of touch, personal touch, hands-on. What happens is in the early stages, they get half as much touch as they used to. And they need twice as much to feel grounded, to feel connected. But those early stages, people start to back off a little bit. So-and-so is making strange comments at church fellowship, so I'm not going to talk to her like I used to. Families start to disconnect, friends don't visit as often, so they're already at a deficit. By the middle part of the disease, they need 3 times as much. By the end of the disease, they need 4 times as much as what they used to get touch-wise. And clinical touch doesn't count. So if we're talking about someone who lives in assisted living, the personal touch that they get during care, when someone's helping them get dressed or take a shower, that doesn't count as personal touch. We're talking about a hug. We're talking about a hand massage. We're talking about rubbing the face, or my husband gave me a cute little miniature rose for Valentine's Day. It was a hug. It was oh my gosh, it was taking time to really look in the eyes. And that is something that people with dementia need. And they also aren't necessarily getting what they need. So physical touch is one. Next, speaking words of affirmation. And that can be anything from, you're doing great, or I think you look wonderful today, or that color is so pretty on you. Compliments. I'm so glad that you're here to help me, because it really does make a difference. I could sit here all day and try to fold, the napkins or match the socks or whatever, but you're being able to help me really helps, makes my day go a lot easier. Spending quality time together is another of the love languages. Receiving gifts and performing acts of service. I don't have whenever I do training, I usually have mess around me. But this weekend we cleaned, so I don't have my little activity bag next to me. I apologize. But I have paracord that we're using in one of my groups that I'm doing to make lanyards for deployed military soldiers in the military, because with that, it's a purpose project. It's just looping, tightening, looping, tightening. It's so simple. And so people in our memory cafe are doing that activity that we will then ship out, to be deployed in the field. And that's an act of service that we can do together. But like I said, it could be anything. It could be matching socks. It could be polishing silver. It could be all of these activities that we talk about, where someone can do something failure free that they can do with us. And that's another way to improve our connection and replace some intimacy. All right, so then what is sexuality? Sexuality, of course, gets to be a little more specific about physical closeness, a uniting of attitudes, feelings, and behaviors, although not always. This probably was more of a definition for my generation than like my kids' generation, because it was, before their generation even. My kids are now, almost 18 and almost 21. But younger people really taught my generation and the generations before me that you don't need to be connected with someone intimately in order to have sex with them and to have a sexual relationship and to have that be a norm, or certainly not aberrant, abnormal behavior. But originally, when we're talking about our clients, or older adults now, we're usually talking about a physical closeness that comes with intimacy as well. It includes also sexual identity, the desire for closeness, and an inner closeness that calls forth your personhood. It's not just the act of sex. One of the things that I point out to people while I'm doing this training too is that if you look back at Abraham Maslow, old psychologist or psychiatrist from the 50s and 60s and so forth, talked about the pyramid of our human needs. And in the very bottom of the pyramid is water, shelter, food, the very basics of life. Sex is there. A lot of us think that sex is higher up in the pyramid because of intimacy, but it's not. Sex is actually in the very basic foundation. Sex is a basic human need. And part of that's for procreation, but it's really not. It's really much more of a personal biological issue than anything related to religion or anything, of a spiritual intimacy. So it's important that hierarchy of needs really identify that sex is not necessarily connected to intimacy. So if we're not sure what it is, we think it'll go away if it becomes an issue, right? No, intimacy and sexuality are a normal part of life. And we need to desensitize ourselves just like we do with behavioral issues or medications or incontinence issues. Sex is going to be an issue. If not, you're missing something. Doesn't mean that we have to ask someone and say, gee, did you want to do knitting or did you want to masturbate? I mean, that would just be inappropriate for most generational, issues right now. But we do need to get comfortable with the way to respond to people so that we're not showing any kind of judgment. We don't want to further stigmatize the person. We don't want to make them feel shamed in any way. We want to treat them with dignity and respect always. And those really are the key to knowing how to respond appropriately. A lot of times when I teach, I tell stories because that's, let's face it, as adults, how most of us learn. So one of the situations that I had at one point working in long-term care, this was a skilled nursing facility. We had a bedbound male resident and an ambulatory female resident. So she could walk, he couldn't. And we interrupted. One of the CNAs went in to give him personal care and found her giving him oral sex. Now, the CNA was perfectly, handled it perfectly, went in and said, not her real name, obviously, Gloria, please come with me. And she said, oh, and the gentleman said, but wait. And so we separated them. We, did our personal care, did the things that we needed to assess the situation, to figure out what's going on. Now, for those of you who are professional caregivers, you know that this is truly the way it happens. These things only happen on like a Friday afternoon when your boss is on vacation, right? This is never going to be a Tuesday at 2:00 situation. And I'm being extreme here, but this is always a difficult situation when you least need it to be. So what happens in this situation is I'm usually the one who ends up getting called to notify the families. Now, a lot of times people will say, well, why do you need to notify the family? When we're dealing with dementia issues, which we're going to talk about in the second part of the presentation tonight, legally, we have to deal with issues of consent. And unfortunately, at a certain stage, and that's usually the stage that people are at in nursing homes, in skilled care, is we have to look at their ability to consent, and we probably need to let know the primary decision maker. So I called up, and oh, by the way, healthcare professionals, you believe me when I say it's always the son of the woman and the daughter of the man. Because if it was the son of the man, he'd be going, yeah, dad, all right. And the daughter of the woman would say, oh, that's so nice. She's found someone, but it's never that way. I had to call the son of the mother. And his response was, I don't understand how something like this happens. And I'm thinking, okay, dude, you're 70 years old and got married last year. I think you know exactly how this happened. I didn't say that, of course. You can't say those kinds of things. But families respond in very, very different ways. The daughter of the man said, I don't know why you're calling me. The last thing I want to know is what he's up to sexually. I've hated being his sex police. He's been a randy old fool since he was in the army. Oh my goodness. Okay, well, thank you for that information. Would have been helpful to have beforehand. All right, but we also need to know how to handle ourselves in these sensitive situations. People would call me because I didn't blush talking about it. I would be comfortable talking about it with the families and with the individuals. Not everybody is. I had a staff member once who walked in on two men having sex, and he freaked out, the caregiver, the care professional. We need to know what we're comfortable with so that we respond appropriately behind the scenes, so that we're acting and responding with dignity and respect, and afterwards say, this is beyond what I'm comfortable with. I need help from our team. And then we also need to know our resources. Who are the resources that we have? I'm not looking at the chat at all. Michelle, anything that I need to pause or stop or clarify for?
I do not see, except there was one comment from the rabbi. Maybe we want, Rabbi, do you want me to read that one? Rabbi? Well, he asked, he mentioned he's attended other seminars before, and he said this is part of real life. And he also says there can be an issue at skilled nursing facilities. There's also an issue of STD with seniors experimenting with relationships.
We are going to talk about
that. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent. And thank you for being so aware of that issue, Rabbi. Well, I'm not going to jump ahead. Okay. Focus, Pam. All right. So our next issue that we want to address and be prepared to address is body image and sexuality. There are a lot of people who don't like their aging bodies, and they feel like their spouses, or if their spouse has passed, someone else, or, strangers, that they may not like their bodies that they have at this point in life. What's interesting, though, is that all of us, when we were younger, who might look at a wrinkled body, or some flab, or some rolls, or arthritic knuckles, or whatever, old people come from all shapes and sizes. All of those who think old is ugly get old too. And we really need to start looking at what we think of as sex symbols. And we need to normalize and start accepting symbols of age. If we just look at Jamie Lee Curtis versus Jane Fonda, those are two extreme examples. One who says, I'm not doing all of that. Jamie Lee Curtis says, I'm not going to dye my hair anymore. I'm not going to get all facelift and do all of these things. And I don't know whether or not she has had at some point some work done. Whereas Jane Fonda has clearly had a whole lot of work done. She looks fabulous, but there's a big difference. At what point do we say, I'm going to accept the way I look? And I know that there are a lot of people who say, this is for me because I want to be comfortable. But I think that our culture has done a terrible disservice in putting aging features as other, as not good, as not, as not beautiful. And I think that when we look at some of the cultures where they value the aged, and see them as the wisdom of the community, who see them as, the beautiful relics of our history, they have a deeper, and I believe better, appreciation for aging skin, body, hair, etc. I say that fully knowing full well that I dye my hair and I hate the texture, and I hope that it's not aging, but just that COVID response, I mean, we all have to get used to these things. And that is something that we all have to weigh with on our own. Okay. Special note about the LGBTQ plus population. There are really unique issues for this population. And for those of you who are healthcare professionals, please, please, please take this into consideration. No one should have to recloset because they're going into long-term care. And that's a lot of times what a lot of people experience, that social isolation, especially in assisted living, nursing home, adult day, senior center, et cetera, because there's no tolerance in certain populations. Those of you who live in New York City, I think you have a much better tolerance level in most areas, but that might be my Connecticut bias, that a city that is so metropolitan and so worldly. I mean, really, you're the best city on the planet. Don't tell Paris or London. That we assume that it's not as big a problem there as it would be out in Colorado or Connecticut or New Jersey or Iowa. Also, a lot of persons who are the LGBTQ plus population don't have as many extended family personal resources. So they may not have adult children. They may not have a care partner. We at Care and Kind work with a lot of folks who really live alone, don't have other resources, and are going through the disease process, really relying on strangers. They also have numerous health disparities. They don't have the same access, especially when we start looking at transgender population. There are all kinds of issues there as well. And how to deal with, you go to the hospital, the emergency room, and you're transgendered, what are some of the issues that we need to address there as well? Of course, stigma, and for a lot of folks in this population, a lot of poverty. So the personal resources, the financial resources, the healthcare resources, all have to be taken into consideration. Obviously, very individual, but it's something that we as professionals need to be made aware of, because we shouldn't be relying on our clients to educate us.
Yeah, I'm going to ask one quick question here.
Yep.
Does the person who is in chat, does the person need a diagnosis of dementia before it is determined that they do not have capacity to consent?
Great question. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but I will tell you this. A person who is conserved of person and estate because of their mental illness can still get married and still retains the capacity to consent. So the problem, to answer your question, I'm going to answer it with another question, unfortunately, is what are the issues? Because if it's a long-term care setting that is asking that question, the issue comes down to, what does the government consider to be abuse? If it is a person living in the community, it may be irrelevant altogether. We'll get into some more of that later on, because those are really hot topics. One of the things that we try to take into consideration is that the person's consent can be overt or it can be based in confusion. So if it is an overt consent, but it's based in confusion, like for instance, spousal confusion, I'm going to consent to have sex with this stranger because I am demented and confused and I think he's my husband. All right. Am I consenting really? If I'm living in a different world, and that's a part of consent, is knowing what you're doing, knowing who you're doing it with. The problem is that a lot of times I've had a psychiatrist once tell me that the issue of consent in dementia is much like a 14-year-old not being able to consent because they're underage, the age of consent. But it's not, okay? What the psychiatrist has said is, all she knows is that it feels good. She doesn't understand the consequences. But a person with dementia is not the same as a 14-year-old. The person with dementia has a full lifetime of experiences of intimacy and sexuality. And they have expectations and needs that are different than a 14-year-old as well. So it's not at all the same, and it's much, much more complicated. Anybody who says, oh, this is easy, it's just this, isn't taking into consideration all of the complexities that this becomes. We're going to spend some more time talking about that too. All right, let's talk briefly about some of the normal aging and sex changes. And then we'll take a little break. All right, Let me just make sure yes. Okay, that's where I want to take a break. Okay. So first of all, the truth about sex meds, Viagra, Cialis, Levitra, herbal preparations and everything are used to enhance sex drive and performance. What happens a lot is that people don't realize that it may not be, I don't want to say just, erectile dysfunction. You can take these meds and it may not even take care of the problem. There are so many issues that happen with age where people who are older are having hypertension, medications for hypertension, medications for depression, medications for other cardiovascular issues, diabetes. All of these things decrease libido and performance. And that's for men and women. What happens is these meds have put a whole new peer pressure together so that a lot of times people don't have interest in sex, or at least the same interest that they had when they were 20 or even 40. So, and same thing for caregivers, right? You know, if we're talking about a family caregiver, spouse or partner of person living with dementia, they just may not have the same interest in sex that the person does. So we have to be aware of the fact that just because we've got medications that might take care of a problem doesn't mean that we haven't just created a new problem. Although the benefit may seem obvious, there are medical risks and side effects to those medications. You know, I think that we all said, 4-hour erection. Yeah, I think I'm just going to enjoy that. I'm not going to report that to the emergency room. But there are other side effects of these medications as well. And so people have to be aware of that. We do, as someone mentioned before in the, I think it was Rabbi mentioned in his chat, we have a new era of aging and sexually transmitted infections and sexually transmitted diseases. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, a couple of years ago, ranked the number of cases of gonorrhea as having risen 164% among Americans aged 55 and older. Think about that, 164% for gonorrhea. Syphilis rose 120% in the same population, and chlamydia, 86%. Those are real numbers, folks. And HIV and AIDS, the CDC is now saying that the new HIV cases is higher in the 50 plus group than in those under 40. These are real issues. And if I were in charge of the villages, I'd be just handing out condoms with every admission packet. You know, we've got some of the new cases in 65 older is the fastest growing population. These are incredible statistics. And people think, well, I can't get pregnant, so I don't have anything to worry about. I don't need a condom. Or, oh, sure, I learned about that years ago. I don't need to know about all of that. Not understanding all of the different kinds of infections and diseases that are out there now, and how easy it is. You know, they look healthy enough. They don't look dirty like that. You know, it's just not the same. I always say, you know, if you have more than one partner or a new partner, you need to be getting tested on a regular basis. Depending on the frequency of your partner change, it might be with every partner, or it might be, you know, more like annually. You definitely want to talk to your healthcare provider whenever sex is accompanied by pain, if you're dealing with sadness or depression, if you have worries about medical conditions and persistent performance issues, prostate or estrogen issues, and safe sex concerns. Now, when we're talking about these issues with dementia, we also want to keep in mind that in the earlier stages, if someone does remain sexually active, we need to watch and keep an eye out for other issues. Let me give you an example. In the adult day center I used to consult for, we had a gentleman who was cognitively intact, who had a non-monogamous relationship with his partner, and he kept initiating sexual invitations with female clients in the day center, most of whom did have dementia. And he was Spanish speaking. So we had to have, you know, the director called me and said, what do I do with this? So what we did was we had Latinas contra SIDA, Latinas against AIDS, come in and do sex ed classes, basically, 4 different groups. So we had females English speaking, females non-English speaking, and we had and males and non-male and English speaking and Spanish speaking. And what we did was we went over the issues of consent, the issues of what's appropriate or inappropriate in this environment, and making sure, because we couldn't say, hey, that guy who just hit on you, he's got a non-monogamous partner. You have a high risk for STDs with this guy, because we can't share that information. That goes against their privacy. And it goes into a need to know basis, becomes a real gray area in the HIPAA world. Okay, let me pause here and stop sharing for a minute. Open it up for conversation or questions so far. I've scared them all, Michelle.
You can unmute yourself and if you want to raise
please
your hand
go ahead.
or ask a question, go ahead.
Rabbi?
No, I just wanted to mention, I know a case in a skilled nursing facility, a male had specific symptoms and emotional system, other things. And then finally, somebody decided to inquire about his background. They found out that he was in World War II, a naval soldier. And he had, unfortunately, in a certain position where there were a lot of prostitutes. And somebody decided to test him of some of his symptoms and found out he had syphilis.
Very common.
Nobody thought about that.
Uncommon.
Right. Nobody thought about that until they inquired about his background, until he opened up and he said, yes, he was stationed in some area and there were many prostitutes, and that was a common thing that many of the Navy soldiers did. And
right.
And it didn't pop up until years later.
That's right. Those symptoms, thank you, Rabbi. That's an excellent example. The symptoms of some of these STIs and STDs can lay dormant for many, many years. And I had a client over at Hebrew Healthcare where I worked in West Hartford for many years. Very similar situation. His dementia was progressing. It was very erratic. It didn't seem like a traditional kind of dementia or even Lewy body dementia or any other kind of odd presentation. And sure enough, the geriatrician said, he does have that military background. Maybe we should test him for this. Found out he was positive for syphilis, and that was explaining a lot of his strange behaviors. Wife had no idea. He never had any idea that we could figure out. She did get tested. She was fine, but it can happen.
Right. And he was very embarrassed to share that information. He became more religious in his years. And until somebody who I know spoke to him and engaged in conversation, and he felt comfortable sharing that information.
Absolutely. That relationship and that rapport, that sense of non-judgment is so essential in all the care that we do. Yeah. Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome.
All of the family caregivers are going, crap, I got to get dad tested. No, I'm only kidding. Other thoughts or comments? Okay, well, why don't we take a 5-minute break? I always say the brain can only absorb what the fanny can endure. So get up, stretch, walk around, and we'll be back in 5. Whatever your clock says, add 5 minutes, and that's when we'll come back. All right. I don't know if you were waving to me. All right. So I've put on red lipstick. What does that mean? Right? That's exactly right, Laird. Yeah, baby. So I always say there's one in every crowd. There's it a lot of what we're going to talk about now talks about some of the triggers to certain behavioral issues. And basic behavior management applies for everything. I don't care if the person with dementia is disrobing in public, masturbating in the lobby of the nursing home or assisted living, or is just wanting to, have some cuddle time with the spouse. All behavior has meaning. And a lot of times, especially in healthcare situations or in care situations, we need to look at what we're doing to trigger different reactions. And a lot of times back in the olden days, we used to call these difficult behaviors or challenging behaviors. And when it came to issues of intimacy and sexuality, we used to call them sexually inappropriate behaviors. And there was one training curricula I wouldn't even teach because they called them sexually abnormal behaviors. All I could think was, oh my gosh, I don't want my staff to approach my clients and think of them as abnormal. I mean, once we say sexual and abnormal together, now we're talking pure deviancy. And a lot of times we don't recognize what we're doing to trigger this. And I will again share a story. When I was very young, very early in my career, back those days, we all smoked. And I used to love to volunteer to take clients out to smoke because I'm an ex-smoker. I loved smoking. I used to smoke 3 packs a day. I'm actually only 24 years old. I just look old, normally teasing. But back then we could smoke in our offices and we could smoke with residents. So I had this gentleman who had dementia because of traumatic brain injury. And his cognitive impairment was pretty severe, and he also couldn't speak. But he wanted his cigarette. So I said, oh, I'll take Jimmy out for a smoke. And we go outside and I light his cigarette and I'm enjoying my cigarette. And all of a sudden he looks at me and goes, come here. And I'm like, oh, smoking cures TBI. He can talk. This is amazing. He's engaging with me. So cool. And I leaned in a little bit and he says, come here. And he takes my hand. He reaches out for my hand and I'll demonstrate. He scratched my palm. Now, I don't know if you're aware, I wasn't, that apparently back in the day, that was an invitation to sex. Now, I didn't know this as a 24-year-old. So when I leaned in closer to hear him, he grabbed me, molests me, and I went in, told the nurse that he had sexually inappropriate behaviors. But if you look at this, first of all, again, nothing's really inappropriate. I'm not an acceptable partner. And I'm the one who leaned into this. I'm the one who missed his cue. I'm the one who didn't understand what he was trying to communicate to me. So what point was he sexually inappropriate? And so we really want to look at, and I put on the lipstick, and I always, when I'm doing this live in person, I'll pick on whoever is wearing red. There's usually someone in the crowd wearing red. Because what we want to do is, remember that in some cultures, if you're wearing red lipstick, that's hot, or you're wearing red, you're a wanton woman. In some cultures, women don't wear red at all unless they're a sex worker. So we need to be aware of our clients' backgrounds, our clients' expectations, our clients' worldview, and the environment that we're coming into where they're concerned. So just a little fun story about Pam and her naivete. I went home that night and said to my husband, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe what happened to me. And he's like, you're such a hick. I'm like, what? What do you mean I'm a hick? I don't understand. He's like, you didn't know what that was? I'm like, okay, fine. All righty. Slideshow from current slide. Okay, so when we are talking about providing care, and And for people living with dementia, and I did see some comment in the chat about all different kinds of dementia. Yes, we're talking different kinds and different stages. You can be an individual coming to my memory cafe that we just started last week here in my hometown, or you could be going to the senior center or the condo club or the adult day center or assisted living or nursing home or whatever. Dementia is everywhere. It's in all different kinds of settings. But when we're talking about how to respond, we want to set boundaries with a culture of respect, that when people join groups, there are group rules. Sometimes we set them ourselves, sometimes they're already established. Yes, it's a free country, and we still don't allow symbols of hate most places. We don't allow people to threaten other people without consequences. So even within our society, we have certain rules. We don't allow adults to have sex with children. We don't allow adults to run naked down Main Street. If clients or others are making other people feel uncomfortable, then they need to stop those behaviors. A lot of times people will say, oh, it's a sex issue. Well, sometimes it's just a bullying issue with sex as the subject. So we do need our staffs and our helpers, our families sometimes, to understand and be consistent with how we confront the issue or the problem so that we can maintain dignity, so that we can, respond in an appropriate manner. And with respect. And we also need to identify outlets if there are unmet needs. And that's one of the other really important parts here. If someone is bullying with sex, they may have other unmet needs. They may need to talk to a therapist about their own issues when they were bullied, because I've yet to meet a bully who wasn't previously a bully victim. There may be other issues or needs about, being able to resolve some of their issues about their previous marital conflicts or whatever. It could be any number of things. As a therapist, I'll tell you that people have all kinds of stuff to unpack, and rarely do they themselves even realize how big that suitcase is. You can't say that here. We have to look, first of all, as to the person living with dementia, if they can control what they're doing and saying. A lot of times they're very impulse bound. That's a stage of the disease. They may be saying, oh, look, I mean, come on, how many times have you ever been sitting there watching TV and you realize, wow, I've really been scratching that area. Wow, it looks dry. And oh, I didn't even realize I was doing that. Or my daughter will come in and say, Mom, would you please stop humming? I didn't even realize. Okay. A person with dementia may be doing something that they don't even realize. One of my clients got picked up by the local police department for exposing himself at a park. He never did. He was fidgeting with a zipper or a tie on his running pants. He was just fidgeting. He never actually exposed himself, but someone saw an old man sitting on a park bench and thought that's what he must be doing. Okay, so we need to look at, can they control something? What is actually going on? Then we look at behavior management versus behavior modification. A hospital that I was consulting for had a gentleman with frontal temporal dementia. And with FTD, they tend to be very impulsive and have a lot of the more challenging issues with impulsivity around intimacy, with some of the behaviors, exit-seeking behaviors, where their memory might be pretty good until the middle part of the disease. So that's one way FTD is a little bit different than Lewy body or Alzheimer's or vascular type dementias. So the psychiatrist at this hospital had suggested that whenever, let's call him Gabe, whenever Gabe had an urge to go kiss someone, and we always knew he was kissing on people because he would have bright red lipstick all over his mouth. And none of the women on the unit could consent because this was a psychiatric hospital. And so the psychiatrist said, every time Gabe has an urge to wear an elastic and snap it first. Now, I don't know if y'all know anything about dementia, But if they can't remember me, how are they supposed to remember a snapping plan? How can they remember, oh, there's that urge. Dr. Smith said I had to snap an elastic when I felt that urge. It's not going to happen. Behavior modification is very, very difficult to be successful with people with dementia because of the frontal lobe damage. They also aren't necessarily thinking through consequences. So with behavior management, all we can do is prevent or identify first and then prevent the triggers. Now, if that trigger is internal, I can't predict it. So instead of saying, well, instead of the example of Gabe kissing women, let's talk about Rose masturbating. Now, I got a call at one point because Rose had been masturbating and the staff said, you know, she's masturbating all the time. And I said, has anybody checked her for vaginitis? She had a yeast infection. It was itchy. It was uncomfortable. It wasn't even masturbating. But we see a hand in a private, we assume that's what it is. Otherwise, what do we need to look for? Okay, let's say it wasn't a yeast infection. All right. In her case, we would look at what else is going on. Well, she's bored. Okay. Get her involved in an activity. Or it does feel good. Okay, well, that's fine. Give her some privacy and some time. But then we also want to make sure that she's not hurting herself. She actually was using a spoon from her tray to help facilitate the masturbation. And now I know a lot of you are never going to look at a spoon the same way. That's okay. You know, a lot of times we just have to make sure that people can be safe and make sure that their needs are being met. Is there some other trigger that can be prevented? Is it because we've left the television on and now she's watching sexy soap operas? Have you seen soap operas lately? Oh my gosh, everything is on a soap opera nowadays. Okay, or some other show. Naked and Afraid, I just saw somewhere. I mean, you can watch virtual porn on regular cable television nowadays. Is that what's triggering the person? Is someone else saying something? Does someone have a scent that smells like her husband's cologne? Is it something that we're also saying? Again, you know, is this something like, well, I'll tell you. Let's talk about Dear Abby and Dear Ann Landers. Y'all remember these folks? Advice columnists from yesteryear. Dear Abby and Dear Ann were actually born in, oh gosh, I want to say 1918 to Jewish immigrants in Iowa. And they were actually named, they're twins. They were actually named, I had to look at this twice, Esther Pauline Friedman and Pauline Esther Friedman. Can you even believe their parents did that? But so they were both advice columnists, both sisters. And what was amazing to me was in Chicken Soup for the Couple's Soul, dear Ann Landers, shared a story about her parents. And in this story, the husband and wife, mom and dad, living in Iowa, when they got married, they really couldn't afford a full honeymoon. They could only afford a couple of days away at a nearby town. And so that honeymoon, they got this beautiful little metal box. And the deal was, this was way back when now, right? Because they were born in 1918. So this had to be, you know, in the early 1900s, a little metal box. And the deal was that every time they had sex, they would put $1 in the box to save up for their honeymoon, their ideal honeymoon. And Dear Ann shared with the people in the book that she can remember being a child and her father coming home and saying, I got $1 in my pocket. And mom saying, I know how to spend it. And little did the kids know. And they had a beautiful relationship and lots of kids and lots of love. And at their 50th anniversary, well, I'll tell you, prior to that, with each child getting married, their father gave each of them a handmade little metal box with a note inside sharing that story. At their 50th wedding anniversary, mom and dad ended up going for a 2-week all expenses paid, wonderful Hawaiian honeymoon, second honeymoon at that point. And dad getting on the plane said to one of the sons-in-law, tonight we start working on number 75. Okay. Beautiful story of love, of vows, of passion. Now imagine, I don't know if y'all heard, but dear Abby ended up with dementia. What do you think, knowing that story, was going through her mind if she was living in a nursing home or had a private duty caregiver or whatever, and that person said, oh, I love payday. It feels good to have $1 in my pocket. All right. Sometimes the most innocent things that we say or do can trigger sexualized thoughts without our ever intending to. So we have to look at ourselves and figure out what that is, you know, how that might influence things. All right. Until what do us part? Chronic illness, chronic cognitive disability, need for assistance with activities of daily living, or institutionalization, or death. Of course, most of us are familiar with until death do us part. But a lot of times what happens is, as a couple is going through dementia or any other kind of intensive illness, our sexual interest diminishes significantly. Unfortunately, whether it does or it doesn't, there's a whole lot of stigma and nobody good or skilled at talking about this. I had a client once whose husband, the well spouse husband, really wanted to stay connected to his wife, but his wife had forgotten who he was. So now we've got issues of consent, we've got issues of marriage. And at that point, I was working, like I said, for the Hebrew home. The rabbi there said, well, we've got the issue of implied marital consent. Well, I'm not so sure that everybody believes in that. I know I personally don't. No means no, even when I'm married. So we have to look at some of these issues with a broader context, because a lot of the promises that we make, we aren't necessarily thinking about with dementia. So one of the things that we need to take into consideration are what are the interests and the needs and the capabilities of both partners. I meant to have this slide earlier. Is there anything that's really inappropriate for sexual behaviors? See, there's the woman with the red dress. Hypersexuality is really not very common, but 4 to 17%, depending on the study, living with people living with dementia do eventually have some kind of hypersexuality or sexualized behaviors. Because a lot of caregivers are uncomfortable responding to them, it's assumed that the person is just oversexed, but that's not necessarily really what's going on. We need to be detectives and figure it out just like any other behavior. Neither staff nor family should have to tolerate, though, behaviors that make them feel uncomfortable. So if you're the daughter taking care of your father, for example, and father starts to get an erection while you're giving him a shower, if that's making you feel uncomfortable, ask for help. You know, and it could be something simple like setting that boundary or reorienting him, or it could be like looking at how we're approaching this. Is a shower or bath, maybe you're doing a bath because it's easier, or a shower, and that's, you know, maybe he and your mom took showers together and had sex. So we just need to look at how can we adapt the care routine to make it comfortable for all parties. We try not to fight. We set boundaries, we clarify roles, and if nothing else helps, leave the situation and ask for help. If you're a professional caregiver, make sure you're reading your company's policy on workplace safety. And then once you're safe, you want to go back and think about, okay, what were the triggers? What happened right before the behavior? And then really kind of focus on the facts, not just the feelings. What did he say? What did you say? Not that he responded with a gross comment or something like that. Behavioral symptoms can be triggered by all kinds of things. Like I said, a past life response, environmental over or under stimulation, limited communication abilities, both receptive and expressive, gender and cultural factors, our inability to read the client's nonverbal signs, like I mentioned in the story before, and agnosia, which is the client's inability to integrate or interpret information coming through their senses. All of these things can trigger a sexualized response in a person living with dementia. Like I said before, it could be spousal confusion. It could be something where an individual with dementia thinks that this is their spouse. There's a very good video, and Michelle, right now I cannot remember it, but we just added it to our video list. And it has a really good depiction of a gentleman who whistles nonstop. He would have made me crazy with the whistling. And he's got a girlfriend, if you will, for lack of a better word, a female friend in the assisted living. And then all of a sudden his wife and his daughter show up. You know, a lot of times coupling is very, very common in dementia care, whether it is long-term care or adult day programs or what have you. That companioning is something that people just need. We all feel that. I'm reluctant to go to a party unless I know at least 3 people who know who I am, because I don't want to be the one standing in the background doing nothing or having nothing to talk to. And I'm way too shy. I know you find that hard to believe, but I really am, to just automatically go out and start talking to people and say, hey, I'm Pam. How you doing? What do you do for work? Hey, I love that dress. Hey, let's be friends. That's not me. I don't feel comfortable with that. And most people don't. So when someone has a connection, they want to hold on to that. That's human nature. Dementia doesn't take away our human nature impulses. It doesn't change the fact that people need people, like the songs, and I'll say plural songs, say. You know, it really is true that people do need people. And when we find a connection, we tend to go back to where it's comfortable. So then, is behavior that is sexualized inappropriate or unacceptable? Masturbating, not inappropriate in my value system, but it might be unacceptable in the nursing home lobby. That means the location is unacceptable. We have to be careful with how we describe things. I had a gentleman who was found, oh God, this was such a sad story. So this was a gentleman he had dementia on his chart, but I will tell you, I disagreed with the diagnosis. He had mental health issues for certain. I really still, in retrospect, really don't believe he had dementia. I think it was just a misdiagnosis because he came in to an emergency room at some point, confused, probably because of delirium, and because he was old, they put the dementia label on it. He was seen kissing one of our other residents who was wheelchair bound because of a stroke and amputations. So she had bilateral below the knee amputations, and because of her stroke, couldn't speak. She also had limited other mobility, but specifically couldn't speak. So they found them in the day center after hours. We had multiple sites in this, or multiple services in one site. So in the adult day program, after hours, one of the nurses was using it as a cut through to go to the administration wing, and found them and said, you can't do that in here. So he moved her in her wheelchair to the multi-purpose room behind the front desk. So now they're doing it in, they're kissing and whatnot in the multi-purpose room, which gave a whole new definition to the multi-purpose room. Unfortunately, at that point, by the time someone then found them, he was fondling her. And this is where we really got into some of the issues of consent, because she was certainly not fighting him off. She clearly was having a good time. This was very much having a good time makes it sound cheap or tawdry, and it really wasn't. But she was engaged in a very positive way in this experience. So what we want to talk about here, just for the definitions here, is focusing on the behavior. Is the behavior inappropriate? 2 people, 2 adults kissing and then fondling each other. Not inappropriate. Unacceptable? Maybe because she has dementia. She did definitely have dementia. He might have dementia. All right. But the location is what is first unacceptable. So they had to move. And then they had to be separated. For whom is this a problem? Well, it was not a problem for him, but it could have been a problem for her. It was certainly a problem for the front desk staff. Is there a safety issue? Well, there could have been a safety issue. My concern in this consent issue is, could she verbally consent and could she say no? And if she couldn't say no, could she at least get out of her way or out of the situation or scream for help, for assistance? And that's where my concern came in on this particular case, because she couldn't get away. She couldn't yell for help. And she had dementia, so we weren't entirely convinced that she was consenting, although by her behaviors, one might think she was. And then where are the dignity issues? Certainly there's a dignity issue or a lack of privacy issue in the location where this was happening. So then investigate the trigger. What happened right before? Right before they found each other, something had transpired we were not aware of, whether it was verbal communication, whether it was just eye contact over the lunch table, I have no idea. Check the environment, activity levels, internal triggers. So environment was 4:30 in the afternoon, nothing else going on the calendar until dinner. What else are you going to do? Activity levels, they were both relatively active and engaged in their unit activities, and they clearly had connected on some level. Investigate the consequences in your response. Never shame, tease, scold, or argue. Now, what we ended up doing with this particular issue was separating them both so that we could evaluate and then make decisions based on what we felt was in their best interests. Because of her limited abilities, and of course we had to call both families. Because of her limited abilities, we did decide that it was not safe for her, that she really lacked the capacity, and that was with the information from her geriatric psychiatrist and her geriatrician, and the fact that she was conserved. But again, conserved people do not automatically lose their ability to consent. We believed that because of her stage of dementia and all these other issues, that she did lack the capacity to consent. We decided that they could only have supervised visits at that point. Our CEO of the organization felt very much that this resident loved him, that maybe it was an idealized love or not something, but that it wasn't like a 14-year-old. It wasn't like a child saying, oh, I love him, that this was something that she probably felt based on her body image she would never have an opportunity to experience again, and was probably overjoyed with the fact that he really appreciated her and loved her. On his side, we did find a whole bunch of, I didn't even know these things existed. There's a whole fetish for people who like to have sex with amputees. And apparently in the Netherlands and other parts of the world, you can go to ampulove.whatever, I don't even know, and that this is a real interest for some people. So then we became concerned about, again, labeling something like this. Is a fetish normal or not? Is this deviant behavior, or is he really using her because of this? Or we had no idea, but we had enough concerns. Unfortunately, in separating them and effectively ending that relationship, except on a very, very platonic level, they could hold hands. The woman died 2 weeks later. Now, maybe she would have anyway. Maybe it was just her time. But my CEO is convinced to this day that we broke her heart and she died of a broken heart. We'll never know. We do, in long-term care settings, in professional care venues, have a very clear responsibility to protect our residents and our clients. So we have to look at those issues, and we can't just say, well, they're okay, they're adults. We have to look at whether or not people maintain that ability to make choices. So we want to respond with dignity and respect. If it's not an acceptable behavior, we want to make sure that we are responding with appropriate professionalism. We have a lot of residents and clients and adults in any setting, even in their own private homes, who become very disinhibited. And I always tease my daughter, this is going to be her. When she was 4, I had to fight that child to put clothes on. And on shower night or bath night, it was the family joke. Naked boy in the house. Everybody say, yeah, yeah. And that was, because Tommy was getting naked and going to go take a shower, and Charlotte's calling it out, and it was just a thing. We used to have conversations with Charlotte. It's so funny now. She would probably kill me if she heard me telling you this, but we would say, Charlotte, there's a reason why they call them privates, because you need to keep them private. Otherwise, they would call them publics. All right. As a 4-year-old, thinking about how dementia progresses, and it's like they go back in time. Not that we should ever treat them like children, but that whole concept that Dr. Riesberg and his colleagues at NYU described back in the 80s, that this is retrogenesis, going back from where we came. So as a 4-year-old to be disinhibited as an older, there's the dog coming in for kissies. Hi, Chloe. As an older person with a cognitive impairment, I'm more likely then to also become disinhibited. So it's important to remember that this is a whole lifespan of this person, and their personal expectations change and vary depending on their personal experience. So we're not necessarily dealing with abnormal behaviors. This isn't a streaker. This isn't a person who's exposing himself. This is a person who's getting ready for a shower, getting ready for bed. And heck, if it wasn't for the fact that they're in assisted living or nursing home, maybe they wouldn't have even been wearing clothes. A lot of people sleep naked. So we need to look at, again, is this really inappropriate? We need to not judge, gossip, or label. We need to report facts as needed. And we need to challenge some of those, some of the issues that come up as to say whether or not this is really even a problem we need to be involved with. There are a lot of challenging family issues. Again, sometimes if we're working in healthcare, that's what we have a team for, direct those to the social worker. If you are the family, call the helpline, get some support, ask the questions. We're here, we're not afraid to talk about it, and we're here for helping. So for caregivers and care partner suggestions, number 1, check how you're using touch, tone of voice, hand placement, eye contact. Is your clothing appropriate? I had one facility I walked in, I'm like, this is not going to be an easy consulting gig. I walked in, there's a girl larger than me wearing a very tight t-shirt that says, ask me about the nasty things I do. I'm like, that's your t-shirt? Are you kidding me? Don't tell me that your clients are assaulting you when that's on your shirt. The nails, the makeup, okay, the talk, some of the talk that we now use would be very triggering for an older population. The music that we listen to. How would a person with the confusion interpret all of those things? We need to make statements and avoid judgments when the behavior is not acceptable. Like if a person is molesting you or touching you inappropriately or not redirectable. Okay, then we just need to make very specific statements and say, I'm here to give you a shower today, or, I need to limit the amount of time. I've got lots of things to do, and I'm just here to help you with this activity. Ensure privacy and dignity, especially if there are others like peers and long-term care that might overhear the issues. Whoops, I went backwards. Oh, no, all right. So for various interventions, let's say we're talking about behaviors that are sexualized. We have passive and medical interventions that we can do. Number 1 for passive stuff, and we always want to do these before we do anything medical. Routine and structure, very, very, very important. Identify any issues of discomfort or pain or infection. Avoid provoking a reaction, a sexualized response. Creating barriers. Sometimes it could be very simple if we're talking about, and we don't want to restrain a person. It's an extreme case where we've tried everything else. If a person continues to be I don't know, masturbating. Let's say we've got a gentleman who's constantly masturbating, and it's a matter of restrict access to his body, which is an autonomy issue, or putting him on estrogen. And we did have a gentleman who we had no good ways of dealing with, and no good answers, if you will. And so his family, part of his care plan, we decided to have him wear overalls. He could undo them if he really wanted to get in there, but it was just enough of a distraction. And then we had a fanny pack that we put all kinds of different fidget toys in, and some chewy candies that he liked, gummy candies. So all of those are interventions, though, where a team came together and tried to problem solve this. So we're doing the least restrictive, the least invasive interventions. Make sure you're getting routine physical exams, healthy living with emphasis on activity, exercise, and nutrition. So those are all of the things to kind of manage a person's sexual well-being, and issues of intimacy behaviors. Also, for medical, a more directive, we want to, if we're having issues, change should always first be seen as delirium. Okay, we always want to say, is there a urinary tract infection? Is there an upper respiratory infection? Any change in behaviors or mental status? Until we're proving otherwise, we want to go on that that's the issue. Want to do a medical history, history review their physical exams. Like we said earlier, could this be syphilis? Could this be some other medical issue? Review their current medications, including and especially any recent changes. We may need to do labs or assess for infections or some other kind of metabolic disturbance as well. Oops. All right, so step by step, in order to avoid or prevent sexualized responses during personal care, we want to explain everything that we're doing and limit the misinterpretations of our actions. That means we want to do task breakdown. We can't just say we're going to go in and take a shower. First, we're going to go in and turn on the water. First, then we're going to take your shoes off. Then we're going to start and have you sit. If we say something as vague as we're going to go take a shower, or it's time for your shower, that leaves a lot open to interpretation. So we need to just use that task breakdown so that, I mean, come on, we're going to go in and sit on a tub bench. Doesn't it all sound sexy to me? Maybe I'm weird. It might sound sexy to my husband. Adapt. We want to bathe with loose clothing. Do you know there's no law anywhere that says people have to bathe naked or take a shower naked? We can put a Johnny over someone or a loose t-shirt and let them then, we could reach up underneath. So we don't even have to get them necessarily completely undressed if someone has a lot of sexualized behaviors during personal care showering. Also, for those of you who have a hard time, this is kind of preview for next month's presentation. Getting clothes wet is also a great way to get someone to disrobe. So if you're having a hard time getting someone to feel comfortable in a shower, let them go in with a bathrobe on. Then it gets wet, and then you say, oh, guess what? I guess we need to get that off to get it dry, and provide a towel or something so that they can stay warm. But that's next month. Support. A lot of times what we'll do is a hand over hand. So if this is the client's hand, I'm taking my hand here and I'm just hooking my thumb around theirs and guiding their hands so they're washing themselves. So that way, and you actually say that, all right, now I want you to wash your chest or wash your face so that they're doing it, not us. Also distract. You might need a safe distraction bottle or an object that they can hold. Okay, you hold the shampoo now, or a washcloth. Here, rub my arm, so that they've got something else going on so that they can not just have hands free while you're doing the personal care. All right, let's wrap up some of these legal issues because I know consent is a big issue. And again, logic is not always the realm when we're talking about legalities. Rights of residents versus the responsibility of the long-term care organization or family. First of all, if one person has dementia and is deemed incapable of consent and the other person is capable or incompetent, then that second person is committing elder abuse sexually by legal definition. And this is really tricky because I've been before our Department of Public Health in Connecticut, and I said to them, there's a big difference between two people seeking each other out and rape. And the the deputy director of Department of Public Health stood there with her arms crossed and says, "Are you telling me, Pam, that if your grandmother's raped, you don't want us to do anything about it?" And I'm like, no, I'm just saying that there's a big difference between rape and companionship and two people seeking each other's connection. We do need a doctor or a psychiatrist to determine their capacity of consent. If we're talking about legal capacity, there is very, very little information about capacity to do much. Capacity to consent, capacity to vote, all right, even capacity to drive, we don't have that much general information on. I mean, we've got some good resources, certainly now more than we did 20 years ago. So Lichtenberg and Streepeck are the ones who have done the most work on capacity to consent for relationships and sexuality. And they did, I think their first work was like in the early 90s. And then they did some follow-up in the early 2000s. But if people have questions about that, you can certainly email me and I will send you what I have. Also, we need to communicate with the families to protect the residents' rights, their rights to privacy, as well as their rights to be free from abuse, and their rights to sexual expression. What used to be called the Hebrew Home of Riverdale was really the pioneering group in the US to look at that issue. And again, if people want specific information, I'm happy to share some of the policy and procedure recommendations. Part of it is educating. That's the number one thing that we all need to do is provide education. We need to document and care plan for a lack of capacity to intentionally commit harm. Having been on the phone with the police on a Friday late afternoon while my boss, the CEO, is at a play with her daughter, of course, it comes down to the issue of what's on that care plan. It always comes down to the service plan or the care plan. And really what we're talking about with abuse, if we're talking about two people with dementia, now we're talking about their intent. So if we're talking about two people with dementia, they are really not intending to rape. They are not really intending to harm their partner. And that phrase on that care plan is really essential for understanding the abilities of that person. And really, I don't want to say the get you out of jail free card, but from a legal perspective, it is essential to have good documentation that protects the individual from a consent and intent position. So we want to look at a sample problem of impaired decisional capacity, resident unable to deliberately take advantage of another, spousal confusion with another resident, intimacy-seeking behaviors, or some other wording as such. The goal will be resident will have positive rapport with others in public areas. Resident will not engage in sexual activity with other residents. Need for intimacy will be met with non-sexual approaches. So the care planning on this is really important because what we're going to say here is we see this as a need and we're going to help the person meet their needs for connection and intimacy without it being sexual with peers who don't necessarily understand what's going on. So these care plans really are important to look at their capacity to consent and to make decisions and intent and to have intent. One of the other issues that I did want to share too is that the families may not be on the same page as us when it comes to especially spousal relationships. Remember I mentioned earlier in the presentation about a spouse wanting more and now the person living with dementia has forgotten who they are. That particular situation, we had the spouse pulling on his wife's face and she was resisting and ended up with bruises on her face from him trying to pull her in for a kiss. Really difficult situations, and a lot of counseling was needed for the well spouse. But we really can't, once the person, and it's painful and it's horrible, and it's the whole focus of books and movies, I'm not going to remember it now. The name of the book was great. Noah was the husband. I can't remember it. It'll come back to me. But in these stories, what the spouse especially, but any of us, but especially for a spouse with a loved one living with advanced dementia, we're looking for those moments of lucidity, with those moments of recognition where they're right back there with us. And it's something that we all hope for and we pray for once a person has gotten to a certain stage. And not everybody does, but the majority, if something else doesn't interrupt their dementia process, they will get to a point where they don't necessarily remember their partners. And so we wait and we yearn for that very much. Communication, remember, all behavior has meaning. If sex is normal, then is any expression of intimacy abnormal? We want to remember that behaviors are often the only way someone has to communicate an issue. So all behavior has meaning. Scolding, arguing, teasing, shaming, giggling, these are not appropriate responses. We want to avoid innuendo. And a lot of times staffs, when they feel comfortable with the person they're the home caregiver for, or adult day center, or a long-term care setting, once we feel comfortable, the sexy talk is maybe okay. But unfortunately, all that does is create a culture where everything is acceptable. And now you've got to go back and set new boundaries when something becomes a problem. So my best recommendation is don't go down that road to begin with. Don't let yourself become what in many circles might be unprofessional. You really want to keep it professional, even though we also want a home-like environment. When needed, define your roles and be specific. Dad, I'm here to get you showered. Mr. Jones, I'm your nursing assistant. Please let go. We need to get you dressed for the day, et cetera, or to go to church. For some people, the religious part comes in there and say, okay, we got to do this before we get to church. Now, suddenly we're talking about, bigger issues that have different meanings. Inform your doctor, obviously your supervisor, if it's a work situation, because you may be reporting new information, like we said with the syphilis information. Changes in behaviors could be symptoms of side effects of new medications, stressors, or other things. And remember always, our stereotypes are usually at the root of the problem. I had a husband and wife. She had mild dementia, still living in the community. She had an intellectual disability, though, so it was hard to determine how much was lack of understanding because of her intellectual disability versus dementia. He had a long-term dementia from eating lead paint at a very young age, and now was living in our nursing home because he needed more personal care, but he didn't have a progressive type dementia. And they wanted one more time to cuddle. And she just said, it's our anniversary coming up. I want one more time to cuddle. And so we ordered them a big bariatric sized bed, cleared out an office, set it all up. I was in the office adjacent just in case they needed help. She knew she could call out to me. And most of the staff said, I'm not cleaning that up. Now, I'm here to tell you that with all the meds he was on, there was no way anybody was going to do anything other than cuddle. I mean, medically, there was just no way that this was going to become anything sex related. There was not going to be an end act there, but it would be a beautiful opportunity for them to spend some quality time. But because they were older, because they weren't sexy, they were married, they both consented. This should have been a yes, 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 let's do this, let's make it happen. But instead, because of our stereotypes, a lot of the staff said, nope, not doing that. So I'm not going in there after that. So we want to make sure that we're educating to get rid of stereotypes. If someone is using topic of sex to bully others, remember, we need to take the sex part out, it's just being a bully. People of all ages need intimacy and remain sexual beings throughout their lives. And really, again, that is the goal. These are positive rapport relationships, aside from abuse, which is a whole different issue and a whole different topic. But references, I have lots and lots, and I'm happy to share them with you. Let me take off this and check my time. Oh, wow. Okay. Whew. So practicing of the timing really does work. All right. I am going to open it up to questions.
Yep. There are a couple of questions here. So I'm just going to, here, the last one was, what happens when the situation is in reverse? And it's the diagnosed partner who's the one requesting sex.
Mhm.
And
Yep. So let me answer that first. So it's the same kind of thing that we have where we have to look at what is the issue. Sometimes we can set that boundary and say, I love you so much. And that's when you lean back on those 5 love languages, spending more time together, doing things with affirmation statements. You look so beautiful today. I love you. And still set that, and oh, I'm just so tired, honey, or I haven't been feeling well, or whatever, and set up, I have a headache. We do unfortunately have those situations. That doesn't mean that you need to provide a sexual release. Really, what we're looking at is connecting for intimacy, not sexuality.
And there's
I hope that answered that.
Disinhibition.
Yeah.
My partner's a friendly
Yes.
guy, praise interaction, but sometimes it feels like it borders on inappropriate. Not everybody really wants to chat, and I worry about when it's women. Yet I want to maintain.
Great example. Great example. So sometimes the best thing to do is to find someone either in a support group or call one of us at Caring Kind so that we can brainstorm with you for appropriate redirection statements that you can practice. So for instance, just off the top of my head, because I'm going to put my father in this, he does not have dementia, but I can imagine what he will be when he gets dementia. Runs in our family big time. He will be one of those people. And he is one of those from the 70s and 80s who used to go to restaurants and embarrass the crap out of me. And he would say to the waitress, do you guys take orders to go? And of course they would say yes. And he would say, great, get your hat and coat and let's go. I'm like, oh, Dad, oh my God, it's so embarrassing. Here's your wife and your 3 girls. Oh, so he's going to be like that. And so I can imagine saying that we would say something, whatever works, because you're going to have to try different things to him. Gee, Dad, we don't say that in mixed company. Or, gee, Dad, we save that. That's family talk. Or, sorry, Dad, sexy talk's only good in the bedroom. Or whatever it is. There's going to be some way to curtail some of that disinhibition, because just like I said before about disrobing and disinhibition, our filter for what is appropriate in mixed company, in public, goes away when we have dementia. That's not their fault. That's not them being inappropriate. That's the disease. And there's nothing wrong with saying, oh gosh, I think I even have cards right here that you can have. And I've got these, mine are in Spanish and on one side and English on the other, that say that you can slip. It's a business card that says, the person I'm with has Alzheimer's. Please be patient. Thank you. That you can slip this to someone to say, let's go, Dad, we got to get going, and just explain to them, this doesn't mean anything. It's just the disease talking.
Thank you, Pam. Any other questions from anybody? By the way, someone wrote that the name of that movie that you were thinking of may have been The Notebook.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. The Notebook. And at one point in the end, she goes, oh, Noah, there you are. Oh, I sobbed. And I knew what the book was about within the first page. And it's like a short page, if I remember correctly.
And the whistling guy, was that what you were referring to, Pam?
No, the whistling guy was on the video. I'm trying, it wasn't that movie. It was one of our new videos for training that just popped up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, Rabbi.
You touched on something very important when you spoke about the couple that only wanted to cuddle at least one more time. When I worked in a SNF, skilled nursing facility, I did numerous sensitivity programs for the staff. And one of the things that was so important is to always remind them to be sensitive and to be sincere and to be caring. And that's the role that I played, how important it is, whether it was a female who was really a male who finally was able to share with me her feelings of coming out and why can't the staff understand. And so I explained to the staff how to deal with the person or other issues. The most important thing is to be sincere. And that's one of the things that I worked on at the nursing home years ago when I worked there. Just be sincere, be caring, have a heart filled with love and care for your fellow human being. So when you touched about just a couple wanted to cuddle and nobody really wanted to get involved, well, that's unfortunate, but I think that's important. Whoever works in a nursing facility is to have presentations on being sensitive and caring for your fellow human being.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rabbi. It's so important. You know, just like they say, all you need is love. We just need to have more love. And I'll go out on a limb as a former executive director and say, if you have staff who can't be caring and loving, we need to look at the culture of the organization, because it's not supported then. We want to support caring and loving much more than horizontal violence, you know, and which is so strong, so common in healthcare now.
That's why you're called Caring Kind.
Yes, you're right. We are. Other comments or questions? Was this helpful? Did I answer people's questions that made you sign up for this?
I have a question. I don't work in an institutional setting, but I work with caregivers. Many of them are spousal caregivers. Mm-hmm. And the caregiver's needs for intimacy increase or are not met as the disease progresses. But I find it difficult to talk with caregivers either in a group or even individually because of the taboos that are related to satisfying these needs outside. And perhaps this isn't the right place, but that's my interest. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about that or advice.
Absolutely. I have lots of thoughts and some advice. So I'll start with the advice. You have to be comfortable in your own values and at the same time recognize that not everyone shares your values. So knowing that, I will say that in my world, person who can consent, a spouse gets to make their decisions for their personal experience. It's not that I don't believe in vows. I believe very strongly in my vows. But I also know that when someone has experienced dementia to the point where the person doesn't know them anymore, needs all kinds of care, etc., my personal value system is that I don't believe that that person is breaking their vow, marital vows, by entering into a relationship with someone else. And there are lots of debates about this. I'm not saying you have to agree with me personally. I will say, though, that if you are a professional or working with other caregivers, that you need to approach this very gently and without judgment. We all need to be understanding about the fact that for some people, and I will use Barry Peterson, CBS News correspondent, as my example. Barry Peterson and a couple of other folks in the media as well have come out very publicly and said, my loved one has advanced dementia. Her name was Jan, and I started a relationship before Jan died. And that partner was very involved in Jan's care as well. And I think that as a society, because we care, because we want to help, we need to be non-judgmental about that. And as long as everybody in that now dyad, now triad is comfortable with that situation, who am I to judge? Is that what I would do in my household? Probably not. But there by the grace of God go I. I'll tell you that if I do get young onset like my cousin did, my cousin was diagnosed at age 56. I might have 2 years left. Who knows? I would want my husband to get the support and love that he needs. He's a very physical person. He's very, very emotional. We have very deep relationship. But if I get to the point where I don't know who he is and I'm living in an assisted living, he better go get a girlfriend. I can't imagine how my children would ever put up with him if he didn't. You know, we have to understand that everybody's experience is different. I've got clients who have very loveless relationships. They've been married to the person who is essentially nothing more than a roommate for decades. And now one of them has dementia. Absolutely, I should support them to say, yes, that new girlfriend is a lovely person. Go forth, be happy. Why does that even need my blessing? So we need to, I think, Laird, your question is absolutely right on topic. And thank you so much for bringing it up. Now I'll get off my passionate little soapbox.
Thank you, Pam. Any other questions? Any other comments? Good, bad, or indifferent? I hope we met your expectation. I'm just going to take the last look in the chat box. Very helpful and informative, great presentation. Thank you. Thank you. Feel free to look at our website at any time. We do offer many new early stage services for early diagnosed, cognitive stimulation therapy, coaching for caregivers, support groups for We Journey Together for those diagnosed, support group We Partner Together for those partners and people in the dyad. Lots of things happening at Caring Kind. Would love to see you again at our next monthly educational meeting. Check us out on Facebook, LinkedIn, like us, we would like to be liked. But thank you very much for attending, Pam. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. And reach out to me anytime through Caring Kind. You can reach me at patwood@cknyc.org. P@wood with one T, ATWOOD @cknyc.org. Happy to connect with you. And my phone number, I always have to look up, is 646-744-2959. I never call myself, so I can never remember it.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, for being here. We hope to see you again. And that will conclude our seminar for tonight. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, everyone, for being here.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for being here. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.